Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome into this edition of the Steelers Q&A. We're back on Sunday nights, and we're back on Sunday nights for the foreseeable future because, unfortunately, the Pittsburgh Steelers season has come to a close. The last time we talked on this podcast, it was a Saturday morning. Hopes were high. The game had not yet been changed to Monday. I mean, there were so many things that we were expecting the last time we talked on this show that did not come to fruition. But one thing that maybe many Steelers fans saw coming was this team not quite being there yet and not quite being able to hang with the Buffalo Bills. That is, in fact, how it played out. So this being the first episode after the Steelers are officially in off-season mode, I've got a special guest with me for this episode of the Steelers Sunday Night Q&A. It's my good friend, Matty Peverell. Matty, welcome in the touchdown under. Right? How you doing? How you doing?
I'm good. A wild end to a wild season. So let's bring on a wild off season, eh?
It's going to be a wild one. And, we were talking pre-show that we're kind of excited about that, right? Bring on some of the chaos a little bit because it's different and it's new for Pittsburgh Steelers Nation. And when you're talking about anything from offensive coordinator to quarterback to the defense, I mean, we could dive in, and you're a big draft guy, Matty, so I know you're already well into that. We could dive into a litany of players that could help this team across the board on offense, defense, wherever you want to go. But I think the biggest talking point right now is, where do you start if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers? And I know the offensive coordinator search has to get underway here. Is that where you start, or where are you evaluating this, Matty, just from a Steelers perspective? If you're in that building, where are you starting with this offseason to make sure that you take the next step in 2024?
Yeah, so it's not a long time between now and the Senior Bowl. I think you were the first domino to fall, Mike Tomlin extension. I said last week on some shows I did on my channel around Mike Tomlin, I think he'll sign minimum 3-year deal. That allows you to then go get an OC and say, hey, we're going to sign you and your staff to a 3-year deal, which is important because then if that staff ever gets moved on or Tomlin gets moved on, they get paid out their 3 years. You want that assurity in the NFL, right? It's a business. So the other thing, you need that to happen quickly. Like, it's not going to happen in April because you need to evaluate a draft class and you need to evaluate the free agents that you've got on your roster. It still's got 18 plus there's 5 or 6 guys that I think they should move on to save like $40 million in cap. You got to make those decisions with your OC in mind. You can't make those decisions before the OC comes in, or you're making sure that the first year of the OC is a lame duck year, right? So from my perspective, first domino is Tomlin, second domino is OC, and then you go about and work out who are the free agents you're bringing back, because for every free agent you don't bring back, you've either got to find another one, which can be expensive, or you've got to fill that hole with the draft.
Yep. Yeah, and the Steelers, for all of their good things that we can look at with this offseason, as far as, there's going to be a fresh take on this offense. And you're going to have some money to work with. It's not like you're the Washington Commanders where you've got the whole $200 million in cap space sitting on your table ready to pay out to a bunch of people. You're going to have to play it safe with a few of these things. You're going to have to take into consideration all of your assets here. And I think that where I start with this is with Omar Khan. And my confidence in him to make the contracts work and to hand off the player, the personnel evaluation to Andy Weidel and that area, that I expect and I anticipate that Omar Khan is going to be a driving force for success for this team moving forward, because I think his head's in the right space. He knows where his strengths are. And I think that the Steelers are going to benefit from that. So we get year 2 now where Omar Khan is making all the decisions, offseason number 2 of that. And that's exciting to me, Matty, is just to see, what can this guy do to build off of what I think we all kind of agreed last year was, and it played out throughout the season, really an incredible draft class. And honestly, a pretty good free agency period when you consider what they had to fill and how the players ended up lining up. I think of a Landon Roberts.
Yep.
A fantastic addition. And I think, We talked about getting younger at linebacker. I think he's a good starting block, right? Landon Roberts is a good piece to have in there, and you can start building around that type of piece and, find the guy in there and let him be the run stuffer and let him play a more of a specialist role, that type of stuff. If Omar Khan nails those types of things, then you're going to see the Steelers stock start to rise a little bit faster, maybe when you start to add in the fact that they're ditching crap on offense and kind of uploading freshness, hopefully with Mike Tomlin being able to work outside the organization, right? In the coordinator hire, that we can bring in something that's going to be a fresh take on offense that Steelers fans haven't seen in a while. So that is my expectation and one of the things I'm very interested in. I did want to bring this up here from Ryan Stanley. Thank you, Ryan, for tuning in. Thank you for chiming in here. You start by looking yourself in the mirror and rethinking the way you run the day-to-day business if you're Mike Tomlin. You need to be dedicated to making changes. Maddie, do you feel that Mike Tomlin is dedicated to the next phase, if you will, making the changes that are necessary to get over the hump?
Yeah, so I noticed Steeler Nation Australia in the chat, and we did a show on the week on Saturday, in Australia, our time, Friday night for you guys. And I said the same thing to Shannon the day before. Like, I feel like Mike Tomlin is relieved. If you saw the difference between Mike Tomlin, I don't know how many people noticed the difference between him in the press conference between like the end of the Bills game and the actual end of season press conference. I think he's thrilled to get through a season where he's had a ton of guys be injured. They're still on this phase after Big Ben and the COVID period where the contracts went haywire and they had to do all these guys in voidable years. I actually think he's kind of relieved for it. And I think it was a new period for him getting a rookie quarterback in Kenny Pickett. He talked about that a lot on like the Pivot podcast when he was on that, in that first year after when they drafted Kenny. And so I think for Mike Tomlin, this is fun because this is traditional Steelers backs against the wall, but now we can go out and evaluate that talent. They've taken a punt on a bunch of guys in early rounds. They know now, like, is Najee Harris coming back with a fifth-year option? Probably not. Is Deontay going to be on this roster more than 1 year? I think they'll try and move him this offseason. Whether they do or they don't, fine. But it's not like Deontay Johnson's going to be in Pittsburgh for another 6 years or something like that. So they got to go out and find another wide receiver. Got to find someone that can complement Pickens. So I think, to answer your question, I think with Tomlin now, the day-to-day, he knows how to coach this team. But I think what he's realizing is that, like, he can't do it all. He needs to be able to do it and delegate. And I think he kind of learned a tough lesson because this season, once he punted Canada, he didn't have to just delegate to the offensive coordinator, which was outside his comfort zone. He had to delegate to two guys in terms of Faulkner and Sullivan. So he's been kind of pushed outside his comfort zone already in that. And so I kind of think, we forget that, like, sometimes, NFL coaches, the front office guys, they're all humans. Every human can learn and grow. This is Mike Tomlin's growth phase. And it kind of goes back to the whole thing with the way Big Ben had to kind of change the way he played. If Tomlin wants another Super Bowl, he can't do what he's done for the last 7 or 8, 9, 10 years. He's got to do something different.
Yeah, you absolutely do. You can understand kind of the mindset there. When you go from very early success,
correct,
you want to sustain what that was as long as you can. And I think it's gotten to the point now, and for some Steelers fans, it's taken too long to get to that point. But for Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney II and some of there's literally a lot of fairly new leadership in the Steelers making big time decisions. Mike Tomlin's kind of the only standby from the Dan Rooney years, making decisions on this team. There's a lot of new faces, a lot of new thoughts coming in here. And, they're looking back and saying, oh, well, this is what we did to be successful. And it was, we trusted our head coach to make it work. And we had a franchise quarterback and we trusted him to make it work. And we had a championship level defense. And they're realizing, I think, that that's not quite enough anymore. And so they're going to have to start doing a little more here to get that rolling. I think Mike Tomlin specifically is so ready for this offseason where he can remold this team. I think that's what you saw more than anything in that press conference was kind of a giddy excitement in a Mike Tomlin sort of way. Yeah. If you've watched him long enough, you read that he's ready for this offseason. He's ready to start doing things a little bit differently and ready to go. I'm down with it. I'm happy that he's back, and we'll see how it turns out this year. He's got a lot of pressure on him, as he always does, but that is something to consider here. All right, we have some questions here. I wanted to throw this one up first from Rob Thytoff, I'm going to say. I don't know. I'm terrible with names as it is. If it was Brown, I'd probably mispronounce it. I don't know. Top needs, he says, offensive line, middle linebacker, corner, and then figuring out the quarterback situation. How would you order these if we're just talking strictly these needs here, Maddie, going into the offseason? How would you order these?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've been talking about this question the last few days as well, and you can order them priority, but how you order them priority isn't necessarily how you would order them in priority in free agency or the draft,
sure.
right? Like you're probably like less likely to take a middle linebacker in round 1 unless you're really interested in the guy and you think the 5th-year option, all that sort of stuff. I don't really want to see another middle linebacker in free agency. I want a young guy, right? So for me, if they sign a middle linebacker in free agency, I'm not cool with that, right? O-line, I'm like, yeah, apart from, unless it's an interior guy, it's probably a draft thing. I'm really keen on, when we say O-line, I think center, but that's a 2nd or a 3rd round thing. It's not really a 1st round thing. Corner, I'm also a little bit the same. Like we got gashed so much at the start of the year, like in the secondary, when we had old guys in there. I'm kind of like, I'd rather watch young guys make the mistake and learn from it than have old guys in there that you're just like, these guys are like 3 yards off the pace. So I kind of agree with all those 3 spots. I do think you can get better value for your money at corner and tackle sometimes in free agency than other positions, certainly. So I wouldn't disagree with any of those 3. I think I like the way that QB was kind of put to the side, but middle linebacker has to be there. Cornerback has to be there. They need a center and they need a young right tackle to compete for the job. So,
right. We're talking quarterback, and that's going to be a lot of the focus this offseason. That's such a unique position when you're talking NFL football, and it's not just on-field production. It's how you approach finding the guy in the offseason. And when you don't have the guy on your roster, then, this is an every stone overturned type of situation. Leave no stone unturned when you're looking for a quarterback. If you think you can find that guy in free agency, then you got to figure that out, and you got to try to make that work. If you don't think you're going to be able to get in the draft, but if you think, hey, we can do some maneuvering here in the draft and maybe land a guy, then I think that you obviously can play with that a little bit more. When you're talking about some of the depth pieces that this team is going to need to add throughout the offseason, obviously you can prioritize those a little bit more through free agency as opposed to the draft, and because they're cheaper that way. You've already got a guy with some experience. Maybe he knows the system that you're running a little bit. It can work out that way. I think of, like, when you're talking cornerback, I think of how big a Steven Nelson would have been for this team this year. You know what I mean? That type of cornerback too, who, they're never going to be your number 1 corner, but I mean, Joey Porter Jr. and Steven Nelson to me would look very similar to Derek Stingley Jr. and Steven Nelson in Houston, and that was a pretty decent group of guys. That played pretty well together this year, and so I just think that maybe in free agency you can find kind of that mid-tier cornerback too to settle down that opposite side. While you work in a Corey Trice, while you maybe work in a draft pick. And I think that the Steelers, for some of these, like you've mentioned here, you've got to hit it in both free agency and the draft in order to really make sure that you find a guy. So let's talk a little bit about the middle linebackers here, Maddie. Afton Forred asks, are there any interesting draft candidates at inside linebacker coming up? Anybody that has kind of stood out to you so far? Just maybe 1 or 2 guys. Maddie, obviously you could go with Jeremiah Trotter from Clemson.
So for me, I'm not on him, right? Like, it's the thing we say here. Like when I'm on someone, like I'm on a horse, like to run on like the Kentucky Derby or whatever. I'm not that on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Now I know that people like, oh, his dad played, he's super fast, he's super good, like all this sort of thing. We had the same thing out of Trenton Simpson last year, and the Ravens got him. Quick guy, athletic. I think Trotter's a better prospect than Trenton Simpson. I quite like Junior Colson out of Michigan. I'm also like, as a Longhorns fan, I can't put it past Jay Ford. He's actually bigger in size than what he looks on tape. I wonder about him. I was saying this to Shannon White from your network the other day, that like, I wonder about him in a 3-4 versus a 4-3. But what we need out of that linebacker when we've got guys that can go and run stuff, he's probably all right. So they're kind of like, probably, if you ask me two names off the top of my head, they're kind of, I'm interested in seeing Eichenberg through the draft process as well, assuming he declares. Yep. So there are a couple of different guys there, but yeah, I think Colson with Michigan, you know, the amount of play that he's had, the production he's had, you're not going to go past that. Jay Ford's an impact player. They're the sorts of guys we need to bring in the defense, guys that can make big plays. So yeah, they're two guys that, but I'm interested, like right now, those guys are kind of like Jay Ford's in there at like a back end of the second. He'll probably move up the best part of a round. Colson's in there on some of the boards in the 4th round. He's probably an early 3rd round, late day 2 pick. So we'll see how that kind of goes. But yeah, they're the two guys that I'm watching through the process.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate for the Steelers because they do have a need there at inside linebacker, but this isn't one of those drafts where there's like a Devin White, a Devin Bush. When you look at the, you know, obviously now it's like, well, that didn't work out. But when you look at the, you know, the type of player that he looked like at Michigan and the evaluation that you would have done on him in the pre-draft process, you know, obviously worthy of a 1st round selection from that perspective. Just didn't work out. He wasn't built for the NFL. But there's not really any of those guys this year at inside linebacker, I don't think. So it is a little tougher. At least if you're Pittsburgh, you know, you've got a couple guys, maybe 3 guys that worked pretty well together when they were healthy this season. And, you know, Cole Holcomb now, that's a couple significant injuries in his career that have knocked him out for large portions of time. So that is obviously a consideration here. But you know, it's a tough spot for Pittsburgh. You know, maybe something opens up in trade or something along those lines.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like trade could be an avenue for. I definitely feel like trade could be an avenue at the linebacker spot. But again, when there's few and far between when it comes to guys in the draft, it's kind of hard because the other teams got it. It's like we went through this 2 or 3 years ago in the NFL where there wasn't many good left tackles in the draft, and then it made the left tackles in free agency get these massive contracts because people couldn't get younger and better at the position. So that's the kind of thing to watch. Like, I think inside linebacker is definitely one that we'll see. There's also the whole piece where some guys that play more on the edge in college and then convert more interior, but then you're taking punts, and I think the Steelers need to just really lock down on a guy anywhere between rounds 2 and 4 and be like, we're happy to develop you. And that's the thing. They could look at a guy in the 3rd or 4th round and go, hey, we've got 2 guys that can start day 1. That's cool. You can sit there and learn the defense. We like the traits. We like the athleticism. You can be the guy, but you don't have to be the guy week 1.
Right. I love that process as well. And, you know, the tried and true method for the Steelers was we don't play rookies. You know, that's kind of been the thing. But I mean, rookies come in and they're more ready than ever. It seems like at certain positions, especially. And, you know, I think the Steelers, you know, for example, were too slow to insert Joey Porter Jr. into the starting lineup this year. Probably because he was a rookie. And they're like, well, that's not what we do. You know, Broderick Jones as well. You know, that was kind of one of those things where those guys were probably your better options at left tackle and cornerback. They probably should have been playing to start the year, but because they were rookies, they wanted to bring them along slowly. And I mean, sometimes it works. Jordan Love, sometimes it doesn't. You know what I mean? So that is one of those things where you gotta balance it out and weigh it out. But it is quite an interesting deal for the Steelers this year. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna keep talking more Steelers offseason, what's ahead. Bring on your questions for myself and Maddie. We'll answer those here. Obviously, if you're listening live, we're not going anywhere. But if you're listening on audio, we'll be right back after a short break. And welcome back into the Steelers Sunday night Q&A. Jeremy Betts, Maddie Peverell here with you today. And I'm excited that you were able to join the show. Maddie, you've always got great insights, so I appreciate you coming on, especially last minute. I dropped the ball significantly this week and did not have anybody lined up, so I just threw it out in the group chat. and Maddie was kind enough to hop on. So we always appreciate you filling in here. And obviously he's got great stuff as well. We'll give him a chance to talk about that after the show closes. But hey, let's talk about the offensive coordinator situation here, Maddie. I think that, a lot of fans have their guy of the available candidates, right? And there's going to be a lot of fans that are going to be disappointed if they've pegged one guy and that guy doesn't end up being there. Do you have a general philosophy of offense that you're wanting to see come into town, or do you have a guy? I mean, that you could go with that route as well. Tell me what you think.
So, and thanks, Dave, for the nice words in the comments. I'm actually taking the Dave Schofield draft approach and not falling in love with an offensive coordinator that the Steelers aren't going to get, right? I'm kind of really open to it, to be honest. My biggest thing, and I said it like when I was with BTSC and then when you guys moved across the Steel Curtain Network, and I've never moved away from it. How are you able to score 30 points per game? And you need to be able to score 30 points per game in half the games you play. If you don't, you are not going to win in the AFC. And we are seeing that right now. Bills and Chiefs are going on right now. Like, you've got to be able to put up points. So I personally don't. It's not that I don't care. I do obviously care. But I'm like, figure it out. Run the foot. I want an offensive coordinator that realizes that running out of, on third down, running out of shotgun is not really going to do a lot for you. I want an offensive coordinator that doesn't throw, when it's 3rd and 7, throw for 2 yards or behind the line of scrimmage to try and then get 7 yards of someone blocking well when our wide receivers don't even block, right? I want you to throw for 9, 11. Like Snoop Dogg basically said this the other day to Rich Eisen. And I'm saying, like, Snoop's high and he can figure this out. He's totally right. So I want to see that. I want to see deep balls, but not deep balls when the other team it's obvious, so it's an interception, right? So I'm really open to it, but I also want an offensive coordinator that realizes the value with tight ends, because particularly the year we're going into when you've still got Najee Harris on the roster, you've still got Jalen Warren on the roster, you've got some wide receivers that can be threats. If you can get those tight ends on the field where it's always this catch-22, they're either going to block or they're going to catch a pass. That diversity with two tight end sets, even if we can get 3 tight ends there when you're talking about Connor Haywood in that fullback tight end role, I want to see that. And like the only other thing I'll say on it is this picture that's haunted me since the start of the season where Darnell Washington's there at 6'7" and like 280, 290 pounds, standing next to Calvin Austin at like 5'7", 170 pounds. What you can do with those 2 types of weapons athletically, and we don't use either of them properly, right? Yep. So I just want to see someone that's creative, that wants to score some points. Like, put some freaking points on the board.
Absolutely. You know what my biggest wish is, Maddie, and it kind of falls in line with that. It's I want an offensive coordinator who recognizes the talent on the team and puts them in the best position to utilize their talents for success. Where you've got 2 different types of running back in your backfield, and you're not asking them to do the wrong things. Where you've got a wide receiver 1 just absolutely waiting to break out and be the best wide receiver on the planet in George Pickens, and he's just another guy in your offense. That is unacceptable. That alone, I've said it all season, that alone was a fireable offense for Matt Canada. I don't care if they're scoring 30 points a game, throwing to Deontay Johnson 100 times a game. You're throwing it to the wrong guy 100 times a game. So
100%.
100% of fireable offense, in my opinion. So somebody who recognizes the talent that they have on the roster and builds their offense to maximize those talents. Pat Freiermuth cannot be a forgotten man in 2024. Just kind of to your point on the tight ends. George Pickens, he's not the complimentary wide receiver to a number 1. He is the number 1, and you find other guys to be your complimentary receivers. And that's why I think Deontay Johnson, a lot like you said, could be moved this offseason. Could be a guy on a short leash, I say. He's got another year left on his contract, so maybe they just let it play out and then, sayonara. But we'll see. I just don't think that that's the kind of guy that they would end up valuing. So that's, to me, my biggest wish list. I don't care if it's Clint Kubiak. I don't care if it's Frank Reich. I don't care if it's Frank Smith.
I actually don't want Frank Reich. I will say that. I don't want Frank Reich, right? Like, that's the only opinion. I've got one guy I don't want, and I'm questioning about someone said in the comments about Cliff K. I'm also concerned about him, but I actually don't want Frank. yeah, that's one person I will just say I don't want Frank Reich. But.
Congratulations, Steelers fans. The new offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers is going to be Frank Reich. Just kidding. That's
Probably.
how it goes sometimes, right? Oh, that previous play calling experience right there. It's gonna be the one that bites you.
Yeah, all that quarterback whisperer stuff didn't really work.
No, it did not. It did not. Yeah, it kind of helped when your head coach was actually the quarterback whisperer, Doug Peterson, Philadelphia. So,
yeah.
And we'll see about that too. So, that's just kind of how I approach this. Is I don't necessarily care about the name as long as it's a guy who actually comes in and gives the Steelers offense a chance to work through its best players and puts those guys in position to succeed. Now that we've talked about offensive coordinator, we've got a couple questions here about the quarterback, and I think that they're appropriate because those two kind of, when you're talking offense and the biggest storylines of the offseason, those two go hand in hand here.
Yep.
Afton Fora with another awesome question. What is your ideal quarterback fix? And there's so many different ways you can do it. Maddie, let me go ahead and go first here. And I'm going to say something that's going to be extremely controversial to Steelers fans. Okay. Because I think that unless you go out and get Kirk Cousins, then you might as well just bring Rudolph back and let your new offensive coordinator try one more time with Kenny Pickett and or Mason Rudolph, and let those two guys battle it out in camp, and then draft your third quarterback or go out and sign a low-level free agent quarterback to kind of be your QB3 and let Mitch walk. Because if you're not going to upgrade significantly in free agency your second quarterback or to make him your first, then I don't see the point in going outside and getting somebody who hasn't been there when Mason showed us enough of something to have obviously his name in the hat for 2024.
Yep.
But I think you spent the draft capital on Kenny Pickett, and
Correct.
It's been 2 years. And I think we can all agree with one of the worst offensive coordinators in NFL history, maybe, definitely one of the worst in Steelers history. And so that's a lot of value that you've put into a guy when you spend a first round pick on a quarterback. And so year 3, guys, with a new offensive system, and you said earlier, this is kind of a lame duck year at offensive coordinator, maybe for the offense here. It definitely could be that, but what you want to see now are the signs of actual on-field production, not just the intangible stuff that we've all said about Kenny Pickett, that Mike Tomlin says about Kenny Pickett. But I'm saying the ideal situation might just be to roll with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph and let those two guys battle it out this training camp. And if Mason's clearly better than Kenny all offseason, let him be your starter. And then, maybe trade deadline or something crazy, you might be able to make a play then. But going into the season, I think that's your best play for where the Steelers sit in the draft and for the amount of money that they have in free agency. Unless you're going to spend it all on Kirk Cousins, I just don't see a path outside of that. And maybe you see another path that I'm not seeing, but that's just kind of my thought process. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat, to be honest. I just great minds think alike, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I would say though is that I agree with you. Why would you waste all that money on Kirk Cousins? It's not like, is Kirk Cousins the one piece this team's missing to be in the Super Bowl? No. We spent a while talking about linebacker. You and I off air talked about strong safety for 5 minutes, right, before we went on. So there's a number of spots. So I don't know why you go do that. I don't know why you get Russ Wilson. I don't know why you get any of those guys. But what I would say is I do think they need to draft someone late, but I don't want to see them draft someone late that's necessarily super athletic. My eyes are on a guy like Sam Hartman, Wake Forest, Notre Dame, who's throwing who's a bit more like Brock Purdy, a bit more like some of the guys we've seen in recent years, like Aiden O'Connell, where he's throwing for a heap of yards, played in a very particular offense, but very experienced, older. You bring a guy like that into the room with Rudolph and Pickett. He's not someone that's expecting to start, but he can sit there. He can learn that offense. He can be a serviceable 2. He's a cheap 2. And that should be their strategy. Can they get someone fairly later in the mid-rounds that can be a cheap number 2? Because the less money you spend on quarterback over the next few years, which is why you have to try with Kenny, the better overall the team's going to be. And like they did invest a lot in Kenny. He can still work out to be something. Kenny's got to have the right things around him, and he's never been given the right things around him. So let's give him that shot, right?
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I think that there's weapons on this offense, and there's just been lack of design, and I mean, poor quarterback play has played into the lack of success. To be fair, I mean, Matt Canada did have open receivers sometimes where the quarterback was missing it. So, that's
when you've got Mitch Trubisky back there,
oh man. Yeah. And we can dive into evaluation and do we trust this coaching staff to evaluate their players and things like that. We could dive into that another time, but right now, it's so hard to make wholesale changes at one position when you've got other needs as well.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, and it's an excellent point. How many of these teams across the league, you bring in an offensive coordinator and it's just like that, you're immediately that much better and you're immediately contending. I mean, the Ravens and Todd Monken, that's kind of the only thing I can think. Only team.
But Lamar Jackson, but it's not like Lamar Jackson hasn't been an MVP before.
Exactly. With a Greg Roman offense where he just ran for 1,000 yards and nobody could stop that. So he's just lobbing 35 touchdown passes to wide open guys. So, obviously, the Steelers don't have anybody like that at quarterback on their roster. No. And you take a guy with proven offensive success at an NFL style system at Georgia, and you can kind of pick and translate that. But, the Steelers probably aren't going that route. Obviously, from the college ranks, they're probably going NFL experience by Tomlin's standards and viewpoints here for what he's looking for in an offensive coordinator. So, this is the chance now for us to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what should our expectations be for this season when you're talking about a team that, I mean, some may think they're a quarterback away, but if that's the case, are they a quarterback learning a brand new system away? You know what I mean? There might be some more variables and factors in than just that. Can they be more competitive this year? Can they make it to the divisional round if they get better quarterback play and better offensive play calling? Sure, they could. Mike Tomlin has a track record of putting together competitive teams every year. They just haven't been contending teams recently, and that's what we're looking for. So, Maddie, just any final thoughts here before we head out about the direction? Are you confident in the Steelers' direction? Are you feeling like that we're in a good spot as a fan base, and this we just need to wait this out a little bit, or you have some angst? Tell us.
Yeah, it's funny. People got really negative on that he knocked out of the playoffs and got really negative on where they were finishing the season. Yeah, they lost some games that they should have won. Yes, they won some games that they should have lost. But yes, if you went into the season and said the Steelers going to win 10 games and they're going to make the playoffs, most people would have been, there was a lot of people that were like, no, that's not happening, right? They did it with all those injuries, with a Matt Canada offense for most of the season, or at least a Matt Canada installed offense for the full season.
Yeah.
And Mitch Trubisky just playing terribly. And a lot of the key pieces have injured, right? So I look at it and I'm like, all right, next year it's 10 to 12 wins. And how you write when it comes playoff time. And that means not getting, it's like what Pat Freeman said. You can't get hot the last 4 weeks of the season. But equally, they got to manage snaps better. Mark and I were talking about this back when we were with you guys, where at the 17-game schedule, how do the Steelers manage snaps? It's why I am so thrilled about Nick Herbig, because Nick Herbig allows you to manage Highsmith and Watt snaps, right? So my thing is, how are they going with the plan with this season so that they peak at the right time? It's kind of like we've got the Olympics later this year. When you're at Olympics, obviously that's every 4 years versus every 1 year. But you time your run right. Like there's athletes that will scale up and scale down their training so that when the Olympics happens, they're on and ready to go. We know when the playoffs are happening. So time your run, work it out. Yeah. But I don't think the other thing I was saying to Mark on the weekend when he and I were able to do a show on a different channel together, the Steelers didn't lose a preseason game. History says when you don't lose a preseason game, you don't do well in the season. You don't do well. You don't make the Super Bowl, right? So I don't know what we're all surprised about. So maybe we experiment a bit more in the preseason. Maybe we try a bit more in the preseason. Maybe we give more to rookies in the preseason. And maybe we are happy to lose a little bit like that. As long as week one, day one of the season, whether it's the 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th of September, this year. We're ready to go, and we're seeing something better than what we saw out of them in 2023. I'm cool with that. And I think everyone should be really pumped, because the other thing that I think is the one narrative no one talks about is that even this year, depending on what they do, and why I think Tomlin's excited, we've only had 1 year of Khan. It will take them 2 or 3 years to build a proper contending team. Yeah, they might make the AFC Championship game next year, but were they ahead of where they probably thought they'd be? Yes. Like, it will take them several drafts, several sets of free agency to get this team refreshed in the trenches, both offensively and defensively. It just takes time.
Yep, it does. Absolutely. You didn't make the playoffs in 2022. You made them in 2023. You took a step, right? And you didn't get it looked like it was going to be a blowout, but you didn't end up getting blown out. At 31-17, it was a one-score game deep in the fourth quarter. And so you're talking about a team that's taking steps, and that's what you need to be able to expect when you've got so many changes, front office and quarterback and philosophy, offensive coordinator. I mean, there's so many variables here, and we haven't even touched all the variables that go into making a successful organization run every year. So, Maddie, great stuff as always. Go ahead and let the people know, for those who don't. Well, before we get there, I'm sorry. Let me pop this up, because we did have a
you got to do the
super
chat.
Afton. Got to put the super chat in here. $5 from Afton. Thank you so much. She says, thanks for a great season. Looking forward to discussing free agency and draft candidates. We will be doing all that and more here on the Steel Curtain Network this offseason. And Matty Peverell is going to be doing that and more on his channels as well. Tell everybody where they can find you, Matty, and also on social media.
Yeah, so on Twitter is Aussie Steeler, which comes up on StreamYard YouTube as well. We have a YouTube channel, Steelers Touchdown Under. So we'd love to see everyone there. I have Shannon on now once a week from this channel as well. He and I do a show called The Steelers Global Perspective. We sometimes do those lives. I have Marky D from Steeler Nation Australia, who I used to do the shows with on Steel Curtain Network and Behind the Steel Curtain when it was back that as well. He's in the live chat now. He and I do a show from time to time when we can, because he's got his channel too. But yeah, look, diversity of content, long shows, short shows, draft, free agency, the works. But keen to, sort of have chats with my Steel Curtain Network alumni when I can. And it was great to be here today with you guys. And there's lots of familiar faces in the live chat that I see regularly now, but some I haven't seen since we went off to have a crack at our own thing. But it's just awesome content, and I'm listening into you guys whenever I can as well. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Great. Absolutely, man. Anytime you want to hop on, you just let me know and we'll do it.
I will. I'll have to have you on as well.
Much. Oh yeah, absolutely. Give me an invite. We'll make it work. All right. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in live. If you're listening to this on audio, do be aware that we do this live on YouTube and X and Facebook. You can catch it on any of those platforms, and you can tune in live to the live show and input your questions and comments. So be sure to check that out. But we appreciate our audio only listeners as well, who are faithful to the Steel Curtain Network. Go out and check out the Touchdown Under network and go take a look at that, because it is great content as always. We appreciate you, Maddie. Hope everybody has a fantastic week ahead, and we'll see you next time here on the Steelers Sunday Night Q&A.